Hello everyone, WiinUPro Beta 7 is now available, which means I have to make another long video, of course. So I'm just going to go over the features that are within WiinUPro Beta 7. You'll see a lot of new features for those of you who have used it, and for those of you who haven't, you'll get to know what WiinUPro does. So we have our Wiimote and 2 Pro controllers currently connected, and as you can see here in parentheses we have an LED number. This is actually just is indicated for the binary value. So if you have more than 4 controllers connected, you can still identify which one's which if you know it's in binary. So for instance, this one has the first LED, this one has the second, this one has the first 2 LEDs lit. All right, and I can just click on these to connect them to the program, and I can associate joysticks to each of them or no joystick at all if I want. Choose accept. And up comes the window. First one we have is a Wii Remote. Just to note, the Wii Remote currently does not work on its own for some reason. You have to have an extension attached in order for it to actually read for the Wiimote values, which is odd. Haven't quite figured that out yet. We have controller 2, which is a white Pro controller, and we have controller 3, which is a black Pro controller. Let's take a look at all the assignment options we have. If to assign something, we just click on the button we want to assign it to. This window will pop up always within the middle of this window. First one we have is keyboard. You can detect a key, press a key on the keyboard, and a pop-it will come right here. We can use turbo with those keys, so when we hold the button, it will press continuously, and we can set different speeds for that. We also have a rumble when used, so whenever we press the A key or hold the A key, the Pro controller will rumble. It's not as great as having force feedback from game applications, but it's currently the only alternative. So we also have mouse buttons, which can also use turbo and rumble. We have left, right, and middle for the normal buttons. We also have scroll up and down, which is a single input or single scroll. So if we press our X button, it will scroll up just once. Even if we hold it, it'll only scroll up once, which is great for selecting equipment in games. We have our mouse movement, which we can move it up, down, left, and right and change the speed here. We also have wheel up and down, which this one is continuous and does use speed. So whenever we hold our L button, it will continue to scroll for as long as we're holding it. And these can also be applied to analog inputs, which change the speed based on the analog input values. So you can just barely press up on the thumbstick and it'll just kind of scroll, or you can press all the way and it'll scroll to its maximum speed. We also have shift assignments, which we have red, blue, and green colors. And we also have the cycle shift, which will cycle between none, red, blue, and green. So we have a total of 4 different assignments we can have for each controller. We also have joystick buttons, which we can choose any button that on the joystick that is currently associated with this controller. They can also use turbo. We have joystick axis, which we can choose any axis that are associated with this joystick. We have X and Y, which is common for your left stick, Z and RZ, which is common for your right stick. There's also RX and RY, which you could also use for your right stick. And you have U and V, which are both sliders. Well, this one's a slider and this one's technically a dial, but they both have the same kind of function. They're great use for your classic controller triggers. And for the final assignment type, we have the joystick POV hat. There can be up to 4 POVs, and these are basically your D-pads, which they have their directions up, down, left, and right, which is only one can be activated at a time. If you set up VJoy to use continuous POV hat, then you can have up to 8 directions. For those of you who have used WiinUPro before, the first thing you may have noticed is that there's now a menu bar up here. You can, from here I've moved the load profile and save profile. There's also an exit button where you can exit the application, or you can simply close it with the X. So we can save this profile, name it to anything we want. It will save with the .wup extension, which for me just means WiinUPro profile. So you choose save, and you can also load the profile. which will prompt you to choose any of these files and you can load up the assignments. We also have in our tools window, we have a shortcut to open game controllers, which opens up this window from the control panel. And right now mine says Xbox 360 for Windows, parentheses controller, because I have renamed that to give it better compatibility with games that use Xbox 360 controllers. Normally it says VJoy device. Choose properties real quick so you can see the controller movement on here for your gamepad. And so this is just a nice, convenient, quick way to test everything, make sure it's working, and also to calibrate. Also in the tools window we have our connect settings, which this tells WiinUPro what to do when you first launch the program. If you uncheck show connection dialog, that initial connection dialog won't show as long as it has something to connect. We can choose these controllers to connect automatically. So if I don't want controller 2 to connect, then it won't connect. And if I do want my Wiimote and Pro controller to connect, it will automatically connect those for me. We can also have rename in here, so I can rename my controller 3 to Black Pro Controller. And there it is. I can also do the same for these controllers here. I'll say Wiimote, and they get renamed automatically and instantly in the tabs. And here we get in the connect settings, they will also be renamed here. These will be saved, so every time you open the program, even if you have the show connection dialog, it will display these names here. You can also change the default profile to be loaded when the program opens. So if I choose the profile we just named or we just created, it will load this profile every time we open up the program. And we also have calibrate controller. Now what that does is, see when I move these analog sticks around, the left analog stick actually comes out of the region that we expect it to be in. And that's because we expect it to be a maximum of 100 in each direction. This is actually going to negative 121. So if we choose calibrate controller, we leave the sticks untouched for the Pro controller, click next, move them around in full circles, choose done, and now they're within the area that we expect them to be. Also, while we're looking at the analog sticks here, we notice that there's a dead zone value. We can have this up to 128 for the Pro controller, and this is half of the active area. So you can move the joystick around and it won't register until you've reached past the dead zone value. So you can also bring this all the way down to 0 if you want. And if you calibrate the controller, you should see very minimal numbers here, and then you can just increase it until they disappear. Also, we have the active angle, which can be at the lowest value of 90 and defaults at 135. And what this means is that this is the angle at which each direction is activated. So if we have it 90, it'll work similar to a POV hat. So each direction will only be activated one at a time. So this will only be up until you get exactly on the right in between up and right before the right gets activated. So this can be also increased all the way up to 160, which is just before the 180 mark. So up here will be the entire region at which it's considered up to be registered. The dead zones and the angle values get saved with profiles, and the configuration value gets saved to a configuration file, or I'm sorry, the calibrate controller information gets saved to a configuration file so that you don't have to recalibrate the controller for each profile. In other words, it's global. You can also change the shift that you're viewing by going to the shift menu. Choose red to see the red shift, or blue and green. And as you notice, these shifts will be, cycle shift will be the same in each of them because you need to cycle between them, obviously. And whatever color you've set this one to will be what that shift is. So when we press R while no shift is activated, it will activate the green, and when we release R in the green shift, it will come back to none. Also, the shift state is displayed on your Wiimote or Pro controller's LED display. So when I cycle between the shifts, if I'm on none is activated, then the first LED will be activated, for red the second LED, for blue the third, and for green the fourth LED. And also, say you want to toggle between two different types of input, but you don't want to hold the button, so you want to use a cycle shift. If you just want to toggle between two, you can copy your shift assignments to another one. So if I want to copy this none, I would copy this to blue, and say for my red shift, I would copy this to green. So that way when I choose cycle, I'm cycling between the none, which is the same as blue, and the red, which is also the same as green. So the copying assignments is a really easy way to clone your assignments to other shifts. Very useful. And also, let me show you the auto connect that we had set up. If you remember, we told it to set up our Wiimote and Pro controller, the black one. And here we go. We have our Wiimote and our black Pro controller, which has automatically loaded that default profile that are previously assigned to it. So let's take a look at the features of the Wiimote. We can use a nunchuck with it. Currently, the accelerometer and the IR sensors are not supported or used in any, but those I will be looking to implement those fully at the time of the release of the actual program. So with our nunchuck, we have the same deal of our dead zone and our angle, and we can also calibrate it from here. And it's very simple, very similar. You just leave it untouched, choose next, move it in a circle, and then choose done, and then you should have these values corrected for you. It also supports the classic controller. Now, one thing I want to say real quick is that I don't recommend you do a lot of switching between the extensions. Whatever extension you're planning on using, I suggest that you have that extension plugged in when you start WiinUPro. So as you can see, the classic controller also has the same dead zones and analog sticks, and if they come outside the region, you can calibrate those. It has all of the digital inputs, and it actually has two assignments for the L and R triggers. So one is the analog version of it, where you can have the L, and then you have the R, and then you have the full. As you can see, I can press this, and this will be indicated, but this won't come up until I'm fully pressed. That way you can have two assignments for it. So say if you want L to be one thing, and then you might use L full to be, let's say, a shift assignment maybe. So you want to use this until you press it all the way down, and then it changes your whole layout of your classic controller. You can do that. Calibration for this controller is also similar to the other ones. So you just leave the sticks untouched, and you leave the trigger untouched. Choose next, move the joysticks around, and then depending on where you want your triggers to be chosen as 100%, will depend on what you do here. You can either bring the trigger all the way down to the click, and that will be registered as the maximum, or you can bring it down just right before the click, and that will be considered the maximum. So choose done. And the dead zone here is to keep the trigger from when it's not being pressed to be registered as being pressed. So a dead zone is 0. After calibration, of course, you can see that they're still at 0. And then you can, when you come down, you can see that it goes all the way to 100, depending on how much pressure. Just to note that the click doesn't necessarily mean 100%. There's still some pressure that can be applied after there. So if you want the click to be exactly 100%, when you're calibrating, just make sure that that's your very minimum that you press it at. Now let's go back to our tools and open up the game controllers. Choose properties for this device. See this? Yep, this is the classic one. As you can see, I'll put these side by side so you can see them. We have our left stick and our right stick, and then we have our triggers. And as you can see, the slider comes up with pressure, and then with full pressure, the button illuminates. So every time you first set up a controller, you should always do the Windows calibration so that it reads everything properly. So you just follow the prompts, move the whatever's X and Y axis into all around. Leave handles. I don't have a Z axis set, so I don't have to worry about that. The X rotation, that's my X on here. Initially this will be very low. You'll just barely see any movement when you do that. The Y will be the same thing, just barely any movement for the very first time. Z rotation I don't have set up. My slider is my left trigger, which is the U axis. One thing to note here is that you don't want the full to be registered, so you can just clear the L and the R full, so that when, depending on if you want the click to be 100% or if you want it to be 100% before the click. If you want 100% before the click, that way you can have full range before you actually activate the left trigger full, then just bring the trigger down to right before the click. Or if you want it to be registered all the way, bring it all the way down to the click. And then same thing for the right trigger, which is the dial, which is the V axis. Is if you want it before the click, just bring it right before the click, and that will be considered your 100 range. Or if you want the click, bring it all the way down. And when you're finished, you can see the slider go up depending on how you've set it. So if I can restore these values, let's see, these were 6 and 7, so joystick button 7 and 6. So for my left trigger, I've made it so that the click is the 100% on the slider, as you can see when this button illuminates. For my right trigger, I've made it so that 100% can be reached before the click. So as you can see, when I can click it here to activate that button while the dial is still 100%. Close out of these. And we also have support for the Classic Controller Pro. And we also need to calibrate these. The process is pretty much the same as the Pro Controller. Leave them untouched, move sticks in both circles. Who would have guessed? And since this one doesn't have digital analog buttons, they're all digital only, so there's no trigger full here. You still have the dead zones and all that. Another thing I want to show you guys is that when you load a profile that was only set up using the Pro Controller, it will automatically try to map those controls to match the device of the Classic Controller Pro or the Classic Controller or the Wiimote Nunchuck. So if I open up this, it tries to map that control scheme that we had to match this. Since our Classic Controller Pro doesn't have left and right analog stick buttons, it maps those to 1 and 2 on the Wii Remote. As you can see here, our left press is Joy 12, Joy 13. Here we have Joy 12 and Joy 13. And a lot of these ones over here just get duplicated to the Wii Remote, but most of these over here for the Classic Controller will be identical layout to the Pro Controller. Also, like I said, you can also do it to the Wiimote Nunchuck. You miss a couple more assignments here, but you can do that. And one last thing, all of our assignments are being magically placed into WiinUPro.ini, which is created when you first run the program. Here it stores the everything about each controller based upon the HID of the controller. It also stores if it's going to be the dialog is going to show or not. All those things I showed you that it stores, such as the name here, the configuration or the calibration rather of each controller gets stored within here. So that's just for reference in case you ever need to change anything. If you want to reset everything, simply just delete this file and it'll be like starting WiinUPro for the very first time. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoy all of the features and enjoy.